My sister got engaged to my ex, who almost killed me. My parents supported her and called me a liar. But when he cheated on her 1 week before the wedding and stole my grandmother's jewelry, they all came back begging for forgiveness and money. I left them with their consequences. I'm 32 years old. I work as a project manager at a tech company, and I feel like I can finally breathe after years of drowning in a life that almost killed me. Literally. What I'm about to tell you is something I still struggle to process, because one thing is surviving an abusive marriage, and something completely different is having your own family betray you in the most twisted way possible. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I met Gregory, and my whole world started falling apart without me even realizing it. I was like 24 years old when I met him. I was working in marketing for a small company, and honestly, my life was pretty normal. You know, I'd go out with friends, hit up bars on weekends. Nothing crazy. Gregory was a friend of a friend. He showed up at a party and seemed nice at first, like funny and attentive. One of those guys who make you feel special when they talk to you. We started dating and things were fine for a few months, although looking back I have seen the red flags from the beginning. But I guess when you're in the middle of something, you don't see what everyone else can see clearly. 5 months into dating, I got pregnant. And that's when everything really changed. We weren't ready to have a baby, obviously, but Gregory insisted that we get married immediately. Like he literally pressured me, saying it was the right thing to do, that his family was very traditional, and he couldn't have a child out of wedlock. And I was so scared and confused that I just said yes. We got married at the courthouse 2 weeks later. My parents were there. My sister Diana too. She was like 19 at the time and had just dropped out of high school, which is another complicated story because she always had problems with drugs and could never hold down a stable job. But that day, she seemed happy for me, or so I thought. The wedding was super simple, nothing romantic, just signing papers, and then we went to eat at a halfway decent restaurant near the courthouse. Things got bad almost immediately after the wedding. Gregory, who up until that point had a job in sales, started coming home late. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at all. And then I discovered he was gambling online and spending money we didn't have. I was 3 months pregnant, working full-time because someone had to pay the rent and expenses, and he'd come home at 3 a.m. smelling like alcohol with increasingly absurd excuses. I tried to talk to him, like I'd tell him we needed to be responsible now that we were going to have a baby, and he'd promise me he was going to change, that he was just stressed about the situation. But the promises never turned into actual actions. When I was 6 months pregnant, one night I started bleeding. It wasn't normal. I knew it, and I was terrified. I told Gregory I needed to go to the hospital immediately, and he was playing video games in the living room. He didn't even look at me and told me I was exaggerating, that it was probably something normal with pregnancy and I should just go lie down. I was bleeding more and more. The pain was unbearable, and he just kept sitting there with his headphones on, yelling at his friends through the microphone. I ended up calling my neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, who lived in the apartment next door, and she took me to the hospital. I lost the baby that night. It was a girl. We were going to name her Emma. We had already chosen the name and everything. The doctors told me that maybe if I had arrived earlier, she could have been saved. And those words haunted me for months. Years, really. Gregory showed up at the hospital like 5 hours later, when everything was already over, and instead of comforting me or apologizing for not taking me, he blamed me. He told me I probably did something wrong, that I must have lifted something heavy at work or that I hadn't taken care of myself enough, and I was so emotionally devastated that part of me believed him. I started thinking that maybe it was my fault, that maybe if I had rested more or eaten better or I don't know what, our daughter would be alive. I spent weeks in bed after the hospital, crying all the time, unable to sleep, and Gregory basically ignored me. He continued his routine of playing video games and gambling online as if nothing had happened. A few months after losing the baby, Gregory lost his job. Officially, it was because he showed up drunk several times and had a fight with his boss, but he told me he'd been fired unfairly, that everyone was against him. I told him he needed to look for another job immediately because my income barely covered our basic expenses, and he promised me he would. But weeks went by and then months, and I never saw him send a single resume or do a single interview. He spent all day at home playing video games, sleeping until 2 in the afternoon, eating what I bought with my salary, and when I complained, he'd tell me he was stressed, that he needed time to recover. The situation became completely unsustainable. I worked from 8 to 6 every day, sometimes longer if there were urgent projects. I'd come home exhausted and find the house a complete mess. dirty dishes in the sink, clothes thrown everywhere, and Gregory on the couch with the controllers in his hand. I started feeling like I was drowning. I literally couldn't breathe well. I'd wake up at night with panic attacks, cry in the bathroom at work, and nobody knew how bad things were because I was really good at hiding it. You know? I'd smile at the office and act like everything was fine while inside I was dying. I tried to kill myself twice. The first time I took an entire bottle of sleeping pills, but Gregory found me because he felt like eating something and came into the bedroom looking for money in my purse. He saw me unconscious and called emergency more out of panic than real concern, I think. They did a stomach pump at the hospital. It was horrible. And when I was discharged, Gregory yelled at me the whole way home, telling me I was selfish. How could I think of doing something like that and leaving him alone with all the responsibilities? Which was ironic considering he had no responsibilities other than existing. The second time was worse. I cut my wrists in the bathtub. But again, Gregory found me. This time because he wanted to use the bathroom and the door was locked, he kicked it down and saw me there. More hospital, more stitches, more shame. After the second attempt, something in me changed. I don't know if it was survival or rage or what, but I realized that if I stayed in that relationship, I was going to end up dead. And I didn't want to give Gregory that satisfaction. I didn't want my story to end like that. I started seeing a therapist. They assigned me at the hospital, and she was the first person who told me directly that I was in an abusive relationship, that nothing that was happening was normal or acceptable, and that I needed to get out of there before it was too late. It took me like 3 months to gather the courage to ask him for a divorce. I was terrified of his reaction, but I knew I had to do it. The night I told him I wanted a divorce, Gregory went crazy. He had never hit me before. I mean, yeah, he had pushed me a couple of times, and once he grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. But that night was different. He grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the floor, kicked me in the ribs, in the back, in the face, and he wouldn't stop. He kept screaming that I was an ungrateful bitch, that without him I was nothing, that I owed him everything, and I could only try to protect my head and pray that he would stop. At some point, he locked me in the bedroom, put a piece of furniture against the door, and went to the living room to keep drinking. I was there lying on the floor, bleeding from my nose, with ribs that hurt every time I breathed, and I thought I was going to die in that room. I waited until I heard him snoring on the couch, like at 4 a.m, and I managed to move the furniture enough to get out. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, and left the apartment barefoot. I ran to Mrs. Martinez's apartment, knocked on the door desperately, and when she opened and saw me all beaten up and bleeding, she almost fainted. She called the police immediately. They arrived in less than 10 minutes. They entered the apartment and found Gregory asleep surrounded by empty bottles. They arrested him right there. I gave my statement at the hospital while they treated me. They took pictures of all the injuries, and the police told me I had enough evidence for a permanent restraining order. Gregory spent 1 night in jail. Then they let him out on bail with the condition that he take anger management classes and stay away from me. The divorce process was a nightmare. He tried to fight for everything, even though there was literally nothing to divide because I paid for everything, and he didn't have a peso to his name, but he still made the process as difficult as possible just to fuck with me. Finally, the divorce was finalized like 8 months later, and it was the best day of my life up to that point. I literally felt like a huge weight was lifted off me. I decided to start completely fresh. I found a better job in another city like 3 hours away. I packed all my things and moved without telling anyone, except my parents and my sister, my new address. I specifically told them not to tell Gregory where I was under any circumstances. The next 2 years were about rebuilding. I focused on my career. I did therapy religiously. I met new people. I made real friends who supported me. And little by little, I started feeling like a real person again, instead of just an empty shell that was surviving day to day. My work was going great. They promoted me to project manager. I was making good money. I had a nice apartment in a quiet neighborhood. And for the first time in years, I could sleep without having nightmares. I kept in touch with my parents and Diana, although it wasn't super close because I preferred to keep distance from everything that reminded me of Gregory and that horrible time in my life. My parents were already retired. They lived on my dad's pension, which wasn't much, and I sent them money every month to help with expenses, like $500 more or less. Diana still lived with them, worked as a waitress at a diner near their house. She had supposedly quit drugs, but she had no real direction in life, like she wasn't studying or seemed to have plans to become independent. I didn't judge much because everyone has their process, and she had always been the problematic one in the family, while I was the responsible one, so my parents were used to me being the one who helped financially. One day, my parents called me for a video call, which was weird because normally we just texted or talked on the phone. I answered thinking, maybe they wanted to show me something about the house, or I don't know. And when the image appeared, I saw my mom and my dad sitting together on the couch with weird faces, like between excited and nervous. My mom started talking and told me they had incredible news, that Diana had met someone and was going to get married, and I was happy for her. You know, I thought she had finally found someone who would support her and maybe that would help her get her life on track. Then my mom said the groom's name. Gregory. She said Gregory like it was the most normal thing in the world, like she hadn't just said the name of my abusive ex-husband, the man who almost killed me, the man I had escaped from 2 years ago. I froze, staring at the screen, waiting for it to be a bad joke or for me to have heard wrong. But my dad kept talking, saying that Gregory had come into the diner where Diana worked like 6 months ago. They started chatting, discovered they had a lot in common, and one thing led to another, and now they were engaged. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked my parents if they were serious, if Diana was really with my Gregory, my abusive ex-husband, and they looked at each other uncomfortably, and my mom said yes. It was the same Gregory, but he had told them his version of what happened in our marriage, and apparently things weren't how I had told them. I felt my blood boiling, like I literally felt like my head was going to explode. I asked them what exactly Gregory had told them, and my dad told me that Gregory told them I was the problematic one in the marriage, that he had tried to help me with my mental health problems, but I had blamed him for everything, that the divorce was because I was unstable and violent, and that he had to distance himself for his own safety. I told them that was completely false, that Gregory was a manipulative liar, that he had beaten me almost to death, that I had medical documents, police reports, photographs of the injuries, everything. And how was it possible that they believed him over their own daughter? My mom got defensive, saying that Gregory seemed like a completely different man now, that he had changed a lot, that he was working and being responsible, and that Diana was very happy with him. I told her that abusers don't change, that Gregory was dangerous, and that they needed to get away from him immediately before he hurt Diana like he hurt me. My dad interrupted me, saying I needed to let go of the past, that I was being bitter, and I should be happy that my sister had found love. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like being in a parallel dimension where everything was backwards. I told them that if they really cared about Diana, they would investigate Gregory's background, talk to the police in our previous city, see the legal documents from the divorce. But they kept saying that Gregory had explained all of that to them, that I had made things up to look good in the divorce, and that he had accepted the restraining order just to keep the peace. I ended the call feeling completely devastated. My own family was betraying me in the worst possible way. They were choosing to believe my abuser over me. They were allowing him to get close to my younger sister, knowing what he had done to me, or well, supposedly what I said he had done to me according to them. I spent days unable to sleep, crying, feeling helpless because I didn't know how to protect Diana if she herself didn't want to be protected, and if my parents were on Gregory's side. I decided to make one last attempt. I organized another video call with the whole family, including Diana this time, and I prepared a complete presentation with scanned documents, photos of my injuries, medical reports from my suicide attempts, the police report of Gregory's arrest, written testimonies from neighbors, everything. When I started the call and started showing the documents one by one on the screen, my parents' faces were changing. But Diana was sitting next to Gregory. Yes, he was there on the video call at my parents' house, and she had her hand on his the whole time. I showed the photos of my beaten face after the night Gregory attacked me, with the broken nose, the black eye, the split lip. I showed the hospital documents from when I was there after trying to kill myself both times, with the doctor's note saying I reported domestic abuse. I showed the police report with Mrs. Martinez's testimony describing how I arrived at her door bleeding and terrified. I showed everything, every piece of evidence I had, and I waited for someone to say something, for them to apologize, for them to recognize that Gregory was dangerous. Diana was the first to speak, and what she said completely broke me. She told me the photos could be of anything, that I could have hit myself to incriminate Gregory, that the suicide attempts proved I was mentally unstable, not that he was abusive, and that I probably provoked Gregory until he reacted in self-defense. Then she said something I'll never forget. She told me it was pathetic that I was still clinging to a man who had clearly moved on from me, that Gregory had told her I lost the baby because I was careless and irresponsible, and that it was probably better that way because I wouldn't have been a good mother anyway. I sat there listening to my younger sister, the person who supposedly loved me, mock my miscarriage, defend the man who almost killed me, and accuse me of hurting myself. Gregory was sitting next to her with a little smile on his face, not saying anything but clearly enjoying seeing me destroyed. My parents didn't say anything to defend me. My mom just looked down, and my dad had his arms crossed, looking uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to intervene. I told them that if they chose to believe Gregory over me, if they allowed him to marry Diana, if they accepted him into their family knowing everything he did to me, then I never wanted to hear from any of them again. My mom, I started crying, saying I couldn't ask them to choose between their two daughters. And I told her it wasn't me forcing that decision, that they had already chosen when they decided to believe an abuser over their own daughter. I ended the call and blocked their numbers immediately. A few days later, my mom managed to contact me through my work email. She sent me a long message saying that Gregory was going to move in with them after the wedding because Diana and he didn't have enough money for their own place yet, and they hoped I would reconsider my position because Diana really loved Gregory and deserved to be happy. She also mentioned, almost as a footnote, that they hoped I would continue sending the monthly money because my dad needed some medications that his insurance didn't fully cover, and they depended on my help. That was what finished convincing me I had made the right decision. Not only were they defending my abuser and allowing him into their lives, but they expected me to keep supporting them financially while they did it. I responded to my mom with a very simple email saying I would never send them money again, that they could ask Gregory to support them since he was apparently so wonderful, and not to contact me again under any circumstances. I blocked her email too after sending that. During the following weeks, I kept getting messages from unknown numbers, all from my family or distant relatives they had contacted to convince me to talk to them again. Uncles I hadn't seen in years wrote me saying I was being selfish, that family is the most important thing, that I needed to forgive and forget. Cousins called me saying my parents were devastated and it was my responsibility as a daughter to support them. Diana sent me like 20 messages from different numbers insulting me, telling me I was bitter, that I was jealous because Gregory preferred her, that she hoped I'd die alone and miserable. I blocked everything, every number, every email, every attempt at contact. It was painful but necessary, and for the first time in my life, I set my boundaries and kept them firm without feeling guilty. My therapist completely supported me. She told me I was doing the right thing by protecting myself from toxic people, regardless of whether we shared blood or not, and that real family are the people who support you and love you unconditionally, not those who betray you and then expect you to act like nothing happened. Like 2 months after cutting contact, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Diana, and the message was long and desperate. It said she had discovered Gregory in bed with another woman, a customer from the diner where Diana worked, and that when she confronted him, he told her Diana was boring and that he needed variety. The wedding was planned for the following week. They had already sent the invitations and everything was paid for. Well, the little they had paid because, according to the message, my parents had put all the money they had into the wedding thinking I was going to help them replace it. Diana begged me to forgive her, that I was right about everything, that Gregory was a monster and she had been an idiot for not listening to me. She said she had broken up with him, that she had kicked him out of my parents' house, and that she felt humiliated and stupid. I didn't respond. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction that she had discovered the truth the hard way, but honestly, I just felt sadness about the whole situation. Sadness that it had to get to that point for someone to believe me. My parents started trying to contact me again through relatives. Apparently, after Diana kicked Gregory out, he completely disappeared. He took some valuable things from my parents' house, including some of my grandmother's jewelry that my mom kept, and never showed up again or answered messages. Diana was destroyed. She had lost her job because she caused a scene at the diner when she discovered Gregory with the other woman, and my parents were in financial trouble because they had spent their savings on a wedding that was never going to happen. The messages that came to me through uncles and cousins started changing tone. It was no longer that I needed to forgive to be a good person. Now it was that my family desperately needed me, that if I really loved them, I would help them in this difficult time, that I was the only one who could get them out of the hole they were in. I kept not responding, kept blocking every new attempt at contact, and kept living my life. Like 6 months after the canceled wedding disaster, I got an email from my mom from a new account I hadn't blocked yet. The subject said urgent, please read, and when I opened the email, there was a long message explaining that my dad had had an accident at home. He had fallen off a ladder trying to fix something on the roof. He had broken his hip and needed surgery. The insurance covered part, but not all. They had medical bills for like $15,000 they couldn't pay, and they begged me to help them just this once, that after this they would leave me alone if that's what I wanted. The email ended with an apology, saying they had been wrong to believe Gregory, that they regretted not listening to me, that Diana was in therapy trying to process everything, and that they just wanted to fix things with me but understood if I needed more time. They attached hospital documents and medical bills as proof that they weren't lying about my dad's situation. I read the email 3 times. I looked at the attached documents, and then I closed the email and deleted it without responding. It's not that I didn't care that my dad was hurt. Of course I cared. But I cared more about protecting myself from people who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I knew that if I responded, if I sent them money, I would be opening the door again for them to manipulate and use me, and I wasn't going to fall into that cycle again. My therapist told me something that stuck with me. She told me that compassion doesn't mean putting yourself in danger for others, that you can wish someone well without having to be part of their life, and that sometimes the most loving action you can do for yourself is to maintain distance from people who hurt you regardless of their reasons or needs. She was right, and although it was painful to ignore that email, I knew it was the right thing. Today I have a life I never thought would be possible when I was trapped in that horrible marriage. I have a job I love, friends who support me unconditionally. I recently started dating someone who is kind and respectful and treats me like a valuable person. I live in a quiet apartment where I can sleep without nightmares, where I don't have to walk on eggshells worrying about someone's reaction, where I can just exist in peace. I don't know what happened to Gregory after all the drama. Honestly, I don't care. I guess he found another victim somewhere. Or maybe not. It's not my problem anymore. Diana is probably still living with my parents, trying to rebuild her life or not. It's not something that keeps me up at night either. And my parents are dealing with their consequences, the consequences of choosing to believe an abusive stranger over their own daughter. And although I don't wish them harm, I'm not going to be the one who rescues them from the decisions they made. Sometimes I feel guilty, like I wake up in the middle of the night wondering if I'm a bad person for not helping my dad with his medical bills or for not responding when Diana tells me she needs me. But then I remember everything that happened. I remember being lying on my bedroom floor thinking I was going to die. I remember being in the hospital after trying to kill myself because the pain was unbearable. I remember seeing my family defend the man who did all that to me, and the guilt disappears. I did what I had to do, to survive, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Life goes on, I guess, and I go on with it, finally free from the people who dragged me down, including those who were supposed to lift me up.